What if your worst nightmares weren't just in your head, but shared by thousands of strangers on the internet? Today, we're diving deep into some of the most spine-chilling, mind-bending, and downright terrifying stories straight from Reddit. Stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about reality. Hold tight, because these are the kinds of tales that will haunt you long after the screen goes dark. But before we delve into tonight's terrifying tales, a huge shout out to all of you. Your support fuels this channel and keeps the nightmares coming. If our eerie stories captivate you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a chilling episode. And if you want to help us grow and keep the fear alive, share our videos, drop a comment, or explore our support options on Patreon or Ko-fi. Every bit of support helps us bring you the best spine-tingling content. Thank you for joining us on this dark journey. Now let's embrace the shadows together. Have you ever felt that mix of excitement and dread that comes with moving into your first home? In July 2022, I experienced this whirlwind of emotions when I finally left my parents' house after 28 years and bought my own place. It was a modest house, just a 30-minute drive from my childhood home. After years of sharing space, the thought of finally having my own sanctuary was exhilarating, but it was also a big adjustment. Living with my parents had its quirks. My dad, a chronic insomniac, often wandered the house at odd hours, getting water or using the bathroom. I'd gotten used to his nighttime rituals, but I dreamed of quiet nights without those familiar disturbances. Little did I know that I had inherited his light sleeping tendencies, making the promise of peace feel distant. My new house had a straightforward layout, a small, unfinished basement for laundry, a cozy first floor with a living room, kitchen and dining area, and an upstairs with 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. I had big plans for the space, turning one bedroom into a home office and another into a workout room. For the first week, my dad helped me move in and set up furniture. By the end of that week, I felt almost settled in, ready to make this place my own. That Sunday night, I was wide awake and restless. I tried to settle my mind, but thoughts of unpacking and decorating swirled around. I decided to take a melatonin and a sleeping pill, hoping they would help me drift off. Within an hour, I finally fell asleep, lulled by the calm of my new home. But then something jolted me awake in the dead of night. It started as a distant sound gradually getting closer. Groggy and confused, I initially thought it was just my dad, making his usual rounds in the house. I tried to ignore the noise, convincing myself that I was just half awake and imagining things. But as the footsteps continued, a creeping sense of dread washed over me. Sitting up, I strained to listen. The footsteps stopped. My heart raced, and I suddenly realized those footsteps didn't belong to my dad. Panic surged, and I called out hesitantly, "Dad!" Silence answered me. Gathering my courage, I threw off the covers and stepped into the dim hallway, turning on the lights as I went. Each click of the switch cast long shadows, making the house feel unfamiliar and eerie. When I reached the staircase, I glanced down and froze. There, at the bottom, stood a tall man in a mask, staring right at me. For a moment, I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. My mind raced. Was this real? Was I dreaming? I didn't see any weapons, but the sight of him filled me with a primal fear. I instinctively yelled, "Get out of my house!" My voice shook, a mix of fear and adrenaline. To my surprise, he turned and fled through the front door. My heart raced as I dashed down the stairs, locking the door behind him. But just as I turned, I heard a loud slam. The back door had just shut. There was a second person in the house. Now, fully panicked, I called my dad, my hand shaking as I dialed his number. He answered quickly, his voice sharp with concern. "Why aren't you calling the police?" he asked. I was already dialing 911 as I spoke to him, trying to explain the situation while fighting to keep my voice steady. The operator asked a series of questions that felt surreal amidst my panic. Officers arrived shortly after, their presence a small comfort. They asked for details about the intruders, but I struggled to remember anything useful. I couldn't even describe the direction they had gone, or much more than that one of them was tall. The fear of not being able to provide useful information gnawed at me. It turned out they hadn't stolen anything significant, likely because I had kept most valuables hidden away. The police informed me that the intruders had entered through a kitchen window just large enough for someone to slip through. Hearing that felt like a punch to the gut. My sense of security had been shattered. After the officers left, I sat on my couch, still shaking. I couldn't believe this had happened in my home so soon after I'd moved in. I thought I was safe, finally in my own space, but now I felt vulnerable and exposed. In the days that followed, I took extra precautions. I kept a knife next to my bed, checked all the locks, and set up a security system. The sense of safety I had envisioned when I bought the house felt distant, replaced by a vigilant awareness that stayed with me. As weeks turned into months, I worked to reclaim my space. I decorated the walls, filled my kitchen with food, and invited friends over for dinner. Little by little, I transformed the house into a home. Yet the memory of that night lingered, a reminder of how quickly everything could change. I often thought about the intruders. What were their intentions? Did they plan to cause harm, or were they just looking for an easy target? Those questions haunted me, but I refused to let fear control my life. I learned to find strength in my home, filling it with laughter and warmth. I focused on the positive, cherishing moments spent cooking, working, and relaxing in my new space. Each day was a small victory, a reminder that I was stronger than I realized. And while I kept the knife by my bed as a precaution, I also filled my life with joy. I had faced something terrifying and emerged on the other side, ready to embrace the adventures that awaited me in my new life. This chilling experience happened during a road trip I was taking after visiting family for the holidays. Normally, I opt for flights over long drives, but this year, the ticket prices skyrocketed over $1,000 for a round trip to a destination just a few states away. Reluctantly, I decided to drive, planning to reach home a few days before returning to work. Just as I was about to leave, a snowstorm rolled in, forcing me to delay my departure by 2 extra days. Finally, I set out on the road, and to my relief, the highways were mostly empty. The holiday rush had faded, leaving me with quiet, desolate stretches of road. Most of my journey took me through remote areas, far from major cities. While the solitude was peaceful, my main challenge was staying awake and fighting off the boredom. The first 8 hours went by surprisingly smoothly. Despite my fatigue, the snow-covered roads kept me alert and focused. As the clock neared 10 p.m., I had a hotel booked just 2 hours ahead. That's when I noticed headlights approaching in my rearview mirror, the first sign of life on the road in over an hour. The lights grew larger rapidly, revealing a large van that seemed to be speeding toward me. Since it was a one-lane road, I had nowhere to pull over. I figured the driver would pass me, but to my shock, the van matched my speed and began trailing closely behind me. For nearly 10 minutes, I felt a knot of unease tighten in my stomach. The van was so close that I couldn't even see its front bumper or license plate in my mirror. I tried to convince myself that I was being paranoid, but as the seconds ticked by, the feeling of being stalked intensified. Just when I thought it couldn't get any more unnerving, an exit for a gas station appeared, and I decided to take it, hoping to create some space between us. To my dismay, the van followed me off the highway and pulled into the gas station right behind me. I parked at one of the pumps, my heart racing as I glanced around. The gas station was dimly lit with a closed sign hanging from the door. The surrounding area was completely deserted. No houses, no buildings, just an expanse of snow and darkness. As I began to fill up my tank, I noticed the man from the van stepping out to do the same. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I kept glancing at him, trying to discern his intentions. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but part of me hesitated, wondering if I was overreacting. After all, it was the only gas station for miles, and it wasn't unreasonable for him to stop for fuel too. Then, just as I was about to convince myself it was all in my head, I heard the unmistakable sound of the van's back door sliding open. An icy chill ran down my spine, and a sense of impending danger washed over me. My gut instinct kicked in, urging me to get out of there. Without a second thought, I pulled the pump from my car and jumped inside, locking the doors, just as 3 men burst from the shadows, sprinting toward me from the rear of the van. Adrenaline surged through my veins and I dropped the pump, heart pounding as I fumbled for my keys. I could hear their footsteps pounding against the pavement, each step echoing my rising panic. I managed to slam the car door shut and lock it just in time. One of the men grabbed the handle, yanking on it with all his might, but I was already cranking the engine. My hands trembled as I struggled to get the car started. The 3 men raced around the vehicle, trying each door in a desperate attempt to get inside. In that terrifying moment, I felt like I was in a nightmare. But just as quickly as they had appeared, the men suddenly turned and sprinted back to their van. With my heart racing and the engine finally roaring to life, I slammed my foot on the gas and pulled away, my eyes wide with fear as I glanced in the rearview mirror. I watched as the van sped off in the opposite direction, disappearing into the night. Shaken, I dialed the police, reporting what had just happened, but I never received any updates. It was clear they were up to no good, attempting to abduct someone under the cloak of darkness on that isolated stretch of highway. What terrified me most was how confident and methodical they seemed. As soon as they realized I had locked myself in my car and that their plan had unraveled, they fled without hesitation. It was as if they had orchestrated similar encounters before, their movements eerily coordinated. What could have happened if they had succeeded? I shudder to think about it. I urge everyone to heed my warning. Trust your instincts, stay aware of your surroundings, and never take your safety for granted, especially in desolate areas. You may not be as lucky as I was to escape unharmed. After moving to a small town, I met my first neighbor on moving day. He was an older man out walking his dog who introduced himself and offered a rundown of the neighborhood. He warned me about the tweakers and other unsavory characters around, which I took as typical small-town gossip, assuming I could handle a few quirky locals. As the months went by, he invited me to his place to learn woodworking. We started crafting a shelf for my cat, and during our time together, he asked seemingly innocent questions about why I had moved there, who I lived with, and if I had family nearby. In hindsight, I realized he was digging for information. After finishing the shelf, he met my mum and chatted with her briefly before we headed back to his house. During our walk, he casually mentioned that he could see my yard from his home and noted how I rarely went outside with my dogs. His comment about being able to shoot anyone who broke into my house sent a chill down my spine. How could he see that far? He lived half a block away. Before I could probe further, he suggested we explore more of the town. I hesitated but eventually agreed, curious about what he had in mind. He led me to his truck and pulled something from the glove compartment as I climbed in. While he filled the gas tank, I noticed a holster drop between us when he opened the driver's door. My heart raced, but he waved away my unease, assuring me not to worry about it. As we drove, the conversation dwindled, which felt odd. He had been so talkative before. Now, an uncomfortable silence settled in. The dirt road we traveled became increasingly isolated, with no houses or cars in sight for miles. Sensing my anxiety, he casually remarked that it was easy to get lost out here unless you knew the area well. That did nothing to ease my discomfort. After about 10 minutes of driving, we reached a small creek where another truck was parked. He pointed it out and said, "Oh look, someone else is here." We saw a woman playing with a large dog in the water. As he approached her, she gestured to his holster, and he reassured her that it was just for snakes. To my surprise, she lifted her shirt to reveal her own gun, telling him she wasn't carrying either. Their exchange was tense. He shifted from relaxed to defensive in an instant. Once she left, I was hit by an unsettling feeling. Why had he driven me out to this secluded spot just to turn around? Why did he brush off my concerns about the holster while explaining it to her so openly? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. To break the silence, I began sharing my own story about why I had moved to the town, hoping to create a connection. He listened closely, then shared tales of the town's quirks, mentioning that some locals could be quite racist, and advising me to keep my guard up. When we finally returned to his house, I quickly said I had things to do at home and made a hasty exit. As I walked away, a knot formed in my stomach. I resolved that if I ever spent time with him again, it would have to be in a public place, surrounded by others. The whole experience left me feeling uneasy, and I couldn't shake the thought that my seemingly friendly neighbor might harbor a much darker side than I had ever suspected. A few years back, I decided to spend a weekend camping solo in a remote part of the national forest, where I used to go with friends as a kid. It had been ages since I'd felt the call of the wild, and the idea of reconnecting with nature was enticing. I packed my gear, stocked up on supplies, and set off on a Friday afternoon. The drive was scenic, winding through tall pines and open fields. I arrived at the campground, nestled deep in the forest around sunset. The fading light cast long shadows among the trees, and the air was crisp with the scent of pine. I quickly set up my tent, grateful for the familiar surroundings that felt both nostalgic and comforting. As darkness fell, I lit a small campfire, the flames crackling as I cooked a simple dinner. The sounds of the forest enveloped me, crickets chirping, leaves rustling, and the occasional hoot of an owl. I relished the solitude, but as the fire burned low, a strange sensation settled in. It felt as if the forest was alive, whispering secrets in the cool night air. I shrugged it off, convincing myself it was just the wind. After a few more hours of reading by the fire, I decided to turn in. I crawled into my tent, zipped it up, and tried to shake off the unease that had crept in. Around midnight, I woke to a faint sound. It was barely audible, like distant voices carried on the wind. I strained to listen, but the moment I focused, the sound would fade away. I told myself it was just my imagination and tried to go back to sleep. But the whispers continued, growing slightly louder, almost rhythmic. Curiosity piqued. I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The moon hung high, casting silvery light on the campsite. I listened closely, the whispers now distinct, like a conversation just out of reach. I followed the sound, cautiously making my way deeper into the woods. The trees loomed overhead, their branches swaying gently as if urging me to turn back. But I pressed on, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and intrigue. The voices seemed to lead me to a clearing a few hundred yards from my camp. As I stepped into the clearing, the whispers abruptly stopped. I felt a chill run down my spine. The moon illuminated a circle of stones at the center of the clearing, forming what looked like an old fire pit. Surrounding it were the remnants of long abandoned tents, their fabric faded and torn, as if they had been left in haste. I crouched down to inspect the area, and that's when I saw it. A small, weathered journal half buried in the dirt. My hands trembled as I picked it up, brushing off the leaves and grime. Flipping it open, I found entries from years ago, written by someone named Mark. The entries began innocently enough, detailing camping trips and nature observations. But as I read on, the tone changed. Mark described hearing whispers at night too. He wrote about feeling watched, about shadows lurking just beyond the tree line. The last entry sent chills through me. They don't want us here. I can hear them calling me. I have to go deeper. Just then, I heard a rustle behind me. I snapped the journal shut and turned, my heart racing. In the dim light, I saw a figure at the edge of the clearing, a man standing completely still. He was dressed in ragged clothes and his hair hung wild around his face. I couldn't make out his features, but the intensity of his gaze was unsettling. "Who are you?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. The man didn't respond. Instead, he took a slow step forward. Panic surged through me. I stumbled back, dropping the journal, which landed open on the ground, pages fluttering in the breeze. "Leave this place," he finally said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "They will come for you if you stay." I turned to run, the whispers in my mind echoing Mark's last entry as I dashed back through the trees. The sound of my heartbeat drowned out everything else. I could have sworn I heard laughter following me, a chilling sound carried by the wind. Reaching my campsite, I didn't hesitate to pack my gear. I was a bundle of nerves as I stuffed my tent and sleeping bag into my backpack, barely able to think straight. The forest felt oppressive, and the darkness seemed to close in around me. As I made my way back to the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Every snap of a twig made me jump, and I couldn't stop glancing over my shoulder. It wasn't until I reached my car that I felt a small sense of relief wash over me. Driving away, I looked back at the forest, a dark mass looming against the starry sky. I didn't stop until I was miles away, the whispers still echoing in my mind. Weeks later, I couldn't shake the memory of that night. I researched the area and found nothing unusual, just the same forest I remembered. But when I went back to the clearing on a whim, the remnants of the camp were gone, as if they had never existed. No stones, no journal, just an empty patch of ground. If you've encountered a terrifying event, or have a spine-chilling horror story to share, we at Eerie Shadows want to hear from you. Share your experiences with us, and let's uncover the mysteries lurking in the eerie shadows together. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel for more eerie tales and spine-chilling stories like this one.